Well, so good afternoon, everybody. Welcome to the first of our Los Angeles Speakers series, and we're very happy to be here. This is the home of Vanya Roner, and this is Aura Walker, our speaker today. I'm Etan Boritzer, and we'll be covering our subject today is hypnotherapy and transpersonal healing. And so I'll be putting a few questions to Miss Aura here, and we'll get into a very interesting conversation, I promise you. So Aura, you started 1995 to 1998. You worked and you trained with Native American Indians in Minnesota. And can you tell us a little bit about your interest in working with the tribal members and as well as some of your experiences with them?
Well, I finished college in New York City. Even though I wasn't born in the U.S., I grew up predominantly in New York City and went to grade school, junior high school, and high school in New York. And then in college had read about Native Americans and their healing modalities for different tribes. And I realized that there were similarities to my mother's family in Malaysia. On her father's side were indigenous healers. And it became an intrigue for me about what this form of healing was that American Indians were doing and how similar it was to my mother's family that I had witnessed when I was about 8 visiting Malaysia. So after graduation, I drove across country and went specifically to South Dakota, where I had read stories about these healing practices, healing people of all kinds of illnesses, including cancer. And because of the way I look, I have this kind of universal face where I could pass. And so I passed enough visually that they allowed me to participate in ceremonies. And I saw the basis for their approach to healing, which is very different from Western healing. And the approach is that you look at the root of the illness or the problem or the question. So sometimes it's not an illness, sometimes it's a question or a conundrum. And that became the foundation of not only my interest in working with American Indians, who are these people who are from this land, who are so beleaguered still today, who have these ancient practices and who are struggling. And so I ended up choosing internships that included American Indians in substance abuse recovery, because substance abuse is the number one thing that American Indians are still struggling with today. But many of the young people are becoming empowered and becoming lawyers, attorneys, doctors, and they're helping their tribes to rise up. So it's coming from the ground up. And so that was the foundation of my experience and beginning to work with that population. And it was really the introduction that I had into two worlds of healing from the Western approach and healing from, I would say it's not even an Eastern approach, it's a global, traditional, ancient, shamanic approach of looking at healing from the soul, really.
And one of the things you told me when we discussed that part of your beginning of your career, you mentioned that you were helping the members of the tribe through self-empowerment, that it wasn't necessarily only the counseling and that you were doing. Can you talk a little bit about that process of self-empowerment?
I think that self-empowerment is the key to short-term therapy and short-term success in therapy. So if you have time with a person, if you're a practitioner and you have 30 minutes, say, it's not about what you as the practitioner does to somebody else. It's about empowering that person to move forward in the world and have the tools to rise up and be able to survive and thrive out in the world. And so what I used with American Indian populations early on was art therapy. My undergrad is partially in fine arts, and then my graduate degree was partially in counseling psychology, transpersonal psychology, and art therapy. The wonderful thing about art therapy or art is it's a universal language. And so American Indians, being an artistic people, because there's so many different tribes and there's different cultures within those tribes, they related immediately. So, for example, one assignment for the group was, what is the mask that you wear? And so we used just paper bags, turning those paper bags into masks. And they were able to talk about bridging those two worlds, from their culture into the Western world. And what is that mask? So one, for example, was Mr. Saturday Night, right? The cowboy with the cowboy hat. And Mr. Saturday Night was this mask that this individual put on to be impressive to the world. But really, internally, he was a very broken and sad individual. So that was his bravado that he was projecting.
And so through that experience, was he able to take off the mask?
He was. He was able to talk about it and to differentiate what his mask was and who he really was. And so these were some of the first dialogues that these individuals who were hardcore alcoholics were experiencing in talking about the things that were painful for them, and using art as a bridge to talk about those things. So the American Indian culture relates to art very readily as a bridge to healing.
And I just wonder if there's a shamanic tradition in these Native American tribes, and apparently it was lost, but was there any support, let's say, from an elder or from the tradition in your work with the tribes people?
Yes, in my journey across country after college, I happened to meet a couple of what we would call shamans by our definition, our Western definition. What they would call themselves as wisdom keepers or traditional healers. And it wasn't that they taught me how to use a rattle or how to use sage. It was really in observing how they were working with people and what the approach was in peering into the soul of a person, connecting with that person on a very, very basic human level, and talking about the pain in a very somber and matter-of-fact way. That there was no shame, and it was just, let's go to the root of the problem and let's change this, let's transform it. And that's the transpersonal part. It's taking that crisis and transforming it into something else, or making the space for that healing to occur. And that's where the magic happens. That's where that gap opens up, and whatever you want to call it, we have semantics, right? It's the stunted array of language. So if you want to call it God or universal light force or whatever it is, that comes in and there becomes a shift. And that's what I call quantum healing. It's that immediate shift from being pained or injured or damaged and becoming more empowered.
And speaking of, you mentioned that the tribal elder, the wisdom keeper, would have a somber conversation. Would you say you ever saw anything that was extraordinary, that you might consider paranormal or supernormal power that an elder might demonstrate, or that you've seen anything like that?
Absolutely. I saw some incredible things. I saw a ceremony where the whole room was dark and there were lights flashing around the room, almost like fireflies, but like green and red, just flat, almost like Christmas lights, but flashing and flying around the room. One of the first ceremonies I did was to connect with my biological father, who my mother had kept me out of his life. And after the ceremony, the medicine man said to me, "Don't look for him. It's too dangerous for you." We didn't know. I looked for him in the French embassy. He's French. And I went to France. I looked all over for him, and I couldn't find him. I didn't know he was in the Philippines during Marcos's takeover, and it was a takedown. And so it was a very dangerous time at that time. And so it would have been very dangerous for me to follow through and find him. So that was called a Uwipi ceremony, and that's written in Black Elk Speaks and some of the ancient accounts by a writer named Richard Erdos. He talks about some of these ancient ceremonies that are still done, but they're dying out. The elders are dying out. Others were healing people of cancer and other ailments, where they used a form of healing that I will not do. Called sucking medicine, where they suck something out of a person, and it's used in Navajo and North Dakota and South Dakota tribes, in the Lakota tribe particularly, and the Navajo tribes, and they pull tumors out of people. And this is something that I saw in Malaysia, and I also saw it in documentaries in the Philippines and Indonesia, Thailand, they also practice these traditions of removing tumors out of people. Psychic surgery, I guess, is what the Western term is. So I saw some of that, and it is mind-blowing. You're going, oh my God, what is that? But I'm a little too germ-phobic to do that myself.
But would you say those were effective modalities, that they actually worked on the patient, on the...
Yeah, and then you get into that realm, which we're going to talk a little bit about, I hope, the hypnosis and the power of the mind, the healing power of the mind. Is this, something that the facilitator is doing that convinces the person, the subject, that they are being healed? I'm not going to refute what they're doing, but is the whole process, and in hypnosis, and I'll talk a little bit more about that as it comes up, but the way that the mind works under suggestion and under duress. So when you're going through that healing ceremony, you're under duress. You're reliving and releasing severe issues. And so the mind becomes suggestible to that healing. And they found that placebos are like 90% effective. So does it matter ultimately? Okay. Right? They're getting healed.
If they're healed, and you've witnessed that they remained healed, it was a remission, and
it was
a cure. Well.
Of cancer, and there's a tandem of the ceremony plus herbs. That they have that ancient wisdom of herbal medicine that is specific to the tribe or to the individual shaman who's learned that in his lineage, which is they've shared some of those herbs with me, and I know some of it through my own research, but it's a pantheon of knowledge.
Sure. Well, let's move on. After your stint there was about 3 years. You went to Naropa Institute in, I believe, Boulder, Colorado? And talk a little bit about Naropa Institute, what it is, who founded Naropa, and why you went there, and what was the benefit to you as a healer?
Well, it was a couple of years after exploring these experiences with American Indians that I started a grad school in Santa Fe, but it was too small, and I didn't feel that there were enough peers my age, and so I missed having peers to connect and bounce ideas off of, rather than being the youngest person in a group of much older kind of scholarly people. So I found out at a dinner party about Naropa, and that had been founded, that there was a art therapy department that was part of a transpersonal Buddhist psychology department, and it had been founded by this Buddhist Rinpoche, which is like a cardinal in the Buddhist system of hierarchy, like the Dalai Lama, and then there's Rinpoches, and they're reincarnated teachers who come here to teach people about ancient wisdoms. It intrigued me. After learning with the American Indians, I thought, well, this is a good avenue to get a master's in, and it had the counseling and psychology and art therapy. So I transferred and went there, and it was like Jedi mind school. So we had to have meditation classes. We had to meditate in rooms that were 5 by 5 feet that were all one color. We had to journal about how that color affected us, and they were the 5 Buddha colors. So it was red, white, green, blue, and yellow. And there's a psychology to each of those colors, and there's a positive and a negative. For example, with red, the positive is wine and grapes and love and sensuality, and the negative is addiction and overdoing it and festering in that. So it was really getting in touch with the duality of those aspects within each of us, which everybody has, but it's about how do you keep that in balance and be aware of. Because unless you're aware of that shadow side of yourself, you're going to trip into the darkness. Whereas if you're aware of it, then you can hold that in balance and maintain that balance within yourself.
So, I mean, from the Buddhist perspective, the process of self-awareness first, because the Buddha famously said, hermitage first, then wandering. He meant first take care of yourself, then you can go out and teach. And so that is the process, would you say, that Naropa instilled in you, the self-healing?
Oh, absolutely. It was part of our training. We had to be in supervision, which is the technical word for you have to be in therapy. So we had to do our own art therapy, and it's powerful what comes out, because the art reveals the subconscious. I mean, it doesn't lie, it just comes out. You start with a circle, and then that gets bigger, and then you have this explosive image, and you're like, oh my god, I didn't even know that was living in me. But it's about getting in touch with all of those conflicts or monsters or demons or whatever you want to call them, and knowing them and making peace with them and understanding, having that inner dialogue, understanding and putting it into place so that you can become whole and move forward and know what you're dealing with when you encounter someone else who is unconscious.
2006, you said you started your course in hypnotherapy, in clinical hypnotherapy. And I'm just curious, how do you, in your progress from the Buddhist training and this self-awareness process to hypnotherapy, why did you choose that as along this interesting path?
I had come to LA, and with a 1-year-old, I had left her father, so I had gone through this crisis, a life crisis. And even though I had transpersonal training, I had sort of had this life plan of this was what I was going to do after grad school, and I started a business in the Twin Cities, and we were consulting, and it was all going very well. And then I met my daughter's father and had an unexpected baby, and it all kind of fell apart and blew up in my face and became sort of a living nightmare, worse than I expected, and decided, okay, this is not going to work, and it's 40 below zero, and I have a 1-year-old. I need to go to where I have support. And that was, my family was here. Many of my friends from New York had migrated here. I came here and I wanted to be proactive. I wanted to get involved. And I realized that I was competing for the same jobs with PhDs. And I realized that I needed some actual therapy help for myself. And I thought, well, I keep replaying kind of what happened to me in this cataclysmic, chaotic move from Minnesota, where I moved my business, I lost friends, family, and I mean everything was really chaotic. Moved my whole life here and started over. I needed something to kind of get in touch with what the heck had happened. I felt like I'd been in a blender. I did hypnosis. I saw it in like a yogi magazine, and I wasn't satisfied. I thought, well, what is this? What is this thing? The lady was very nice, but she was very surface, and she said, well, now close your eyes and now you're feeling better. And I thought, well, I don't know what that is, but that wasn't it. And so then I found out that there was a school here in Tarzana that was the only federally accredited program in the country, and had been founded in this very funny, crazy way. The founder was asked to do a talk show on hypnosis, and he developed a school over many years and research based on that. And I took some introductory courses, and I realized if I can master this, I can really help a lot of people who've been through maybe what I've been through in this, like losing, career, relationships, etc., big move, or worse, right? And so it was a 2-year certification. I did it, and then opened my doors, and I realized people were coming in with trauma.
Okay, let's go to the basics now. What is hypnotherapy? And give us also the Las Vegas or stage version, as you call it, and the clinical side. And what are the differences? What is it supposed to be?
So the word hypnosis is derived from the Greek god of sleep, hypnos. And it really is the premise that you go into a meditative state that is like an early sleep, which really is the first stage of the mind releasing or opening up. So I did a little diagram here just to illustrate. So when you get up in the morning and you have breakfast and you're ready to go and your blood sugar is up, your mind is firing very rapidly, and it's like, on the EKG monitors, it's like a very rapid brainwave pattern. And then say you go to work and you forget to eat lunch. Well, immediately your blood sugar drops and your mind starts to maybe wander a little and it slows down. You're in alpha, it's a slower brainwave pattern. And then say, you go and do some afternoon errands and you still haven't eaten. This is just sort of a normal occurrence that a lot of people deal with. Well, you start to feel spacey. Maybe you try to open your front door with your car keys. You're in theta, which is an even slower brainwave pattern. And then you come home, you say, oh, I'm so tired, I didn't eat lunch, I just want to lay down and take a nap. And you're just snoring, there's an earthquake and you didn't wake up. That's delta, that's reparative sleep. So alpha and theta is hypnosis. It's a brainwave pattern where the brain becomes hypersuggestible to changing patterns that are deeply recorded. So the way the mind works is 10% is your conscious mind, 90% is all of your experiences recorded in your brain. So your brain is the organ, and then the mind is the function of that organ. And the filter between that 10% and the stored hard drive of the 90% is hypnosis. And that opens naturally all day long and all night long. So REM sleep operates at 10, 20, 30 minute intervals or faster. And it's where the brain goes in and out of hypnosis. During the day, people doing repetitive patterns or not eating or maybe even doing artwork or working out at the gym, athletes, they're going in and out of deeper states of hypnosis because they're opening to a deeper state naturally. So my job is to open this filter in a non-threatening way and access what is going on in here. And then I can move out the negative experiences through body-mind exercises and create room for more positive experiences. So everyone has positives and negatives, but it's really making room for a lot more positives. And that happens, I can do that within 30 minutes to an hour. It's fast.
When you say you can do that, you mean take someone into that alpha state, between alpha and theta state, and then, let's talk a little bit about the methodology then. Once you have a person, and describe how you take that person into that state, and how you work to bring out the negatives.
Well, I have an intake form, so that helps to streamline what the goals are. So I want goals. It's goal-oriented work. I won't keep using the word therapy, but it's goal-oriented work. It's a dual process, so it's a cooperative process. So I'm working with that person on their goals. So I'm going to ask the person, what are you here for? What do you want to get out of this? And then they give me a little background history. And I'll start with, sometimes people don't have trauma, but if they do, when is the first occurrence of that trauma? And then that becomes a timeline, and we're going to knock that out we're going to knock out the big ones one at a time. And the way that we do that is we go in during hypnosis and we address what many practitioners sort of in similar veins of work would call rewriting the story. Even writers say that. They rewrite the story or change the story. So the story may be an actual story, but let's change that because that no longer serves you. You're repeating, and that's the glitch, whether it's PTSD or anxiety or something else. It's replaying something that doesn't work. It's not functional anymore, and it's tripping somebody up into a loop that's not productive. And so how do we get from that to something really more productive?
So how do you take me into a hypnotic state? How do you take me into that state? Well, you have my intake. You know what I'm looking for.
Right.
So now I'm daring you because, like in Vegas, you can't hypnotize me.
Right. Well, you asked me, what's the difference between the guy on stage asking you to be a chicken and what I do? That's stage hypnosis, and it's cooperative also. But it's that person who was like, I was never in the high school play, pick me, and they will do anything on stage. They're conscious, they're suggestible, and the stage hypnotist also knocks them out. They'll interview them, and the person who's most resistant is usually a high introvert who has a higher locus of control. And so the high introvert is going to be more resistant to that stage hypnotist, so he'll kick them off stage. And he'll usually keep the more suggestible people who are usually extroverts who will do just about anything.
How do you, the hypnotist, know who's an introvert?
I ask people.
Who's a resistant person?
I ask people directly, but some people think that it's better to be an extrovert, and it's not a better or lesser. It's priorities. So introverts and extroverts have priorities. So it's what's your priority and how do I work with that priority? And so I show them a priority list, and they tell me which one they identify with, and that's how I identify. So an introvert, you want to speak to them inferentially because they hear inferentially. So you may or may not want to do this, or you may or may not think about this, or how do you feel about this? An extrovert, you'd say, go ahead, sit down, I need to tell you something. So extroverts hear directly, but extroverts speak inferentially. So they speak inferentially, hear directly. Introverts speak directly and hear inferentially. So they actually belong together in relationship. Two introverts together, it's dead in the water. There's very little chemistry. Two extroverts together, after the fireworks, they're going to kill each other. So introverts and extroverts belong together. They balance each other out in the world. And everybody's a percentage somewhere on that scale. So working with that, I use my voice and how I speak to that person, suggestions, and I have music that I use that's relaxing. So I get them into the relaxed state, and then I address those specific instances that they told me about and change that story through exercises.
Now, specifically, I read that you will have the client standing. Is that correct? Did I read that correctly? Or is it in your therapy? They're not sitting or laying down.
For specific exercises, there's one exercise in particular. I did not create it. It was a chiropractor who created it, and I suspect that it's related to ancient Chinese, something ancient Chinese. It's called magnetic therapy, and it's wiping the body with a magnet, a very thin magnet. And while they're bringing up those associations, you wipe from the head to their tailbone. You wipe down. What happens is the feeling, kind of the fight-flight response of releasing that expression or that memory is, and this is getting esoteric, right? So I'm hypothesizing because I don't know exactly what happens, but it's releasing kind of into their energy field that experience. And then what happens is that the magnet pulls out, like if you want to call it a negative vibration. It sounds hokey dokey, but it works. And it works very fast. Again, I did not, it was a chiropractor named Bradley Nelson who developed that. And I thought, oh my God, this sounds crazy and wild. But a lot of my training sounds crazy and wild. And I go, half on a whim, I'm going to try this. Mm-hmm. For example, there's something called the 7 rays. So the idea is that there's 7 rays of light frequency. And if you can connect with any one of those rays and know what the power of that ray in the spectrum of light is, that you can access a certain level of transformational power that is very fast. And so I use that also. Now that was a training I did. I had a colleague who I worked with in the same office for more than 5 years who nagged me to do this training. And I heard about it at the hypnosis school, and I thought, these people are crazy. Even though I went to art school, finally I did it. And I said, you're telling me if I think about this really one spectrum of color in this specific way that I can access this kind of healing? Yes, that's what we're telling you. Okay, I'm going to try it. I did it. Transformational. I can't tell you why, but the people, the clients tell me, yes, that was incredible. I noticed it. I have a video of a veteran who I did it with, and there's variations of that exercise. There's all kinds of variations, and he said he saw the colors.
And so I'm your client, and let's say with the 7 rays, you're telling me, Etan, imagine this, or see this, or close your eyes while you're standing. I'm just asking a little more specifically what I would expect.
They work in sequences, so you have to know what sequence to use it in. So I'm just going to use one of the rays with you. Okay, so one of the rays works like it like a lightsaber of light, right? And it is the bright white light. It's just clear light, and the way it works is it rolls, and it's about moving energy. So again, this sounds completely crazy, but if you imagine this white light, almost like a rolling pin, rolling through your body up and down, it's going to move stuck energy through you. I've done it in traffic where I'm so desperate that I imagine that energy of white light, like a giant rolling pin of white light moving in front of me, and the traffic starts moving. I can't tell you how that works, but it works.
So you're going to suggest that to me. While you're sitting here, Etan, I'd like you to imagine
this white light, like a rolling pin, rolling from your head to your feet and scanning your body, looking for blocks. And if you do that, you're going to know exactly where that block is. Whereas if I were to like be at a cocktail party, so where do you feel blocked? Where do I feel blocked? Like really like overthinking it. Whereas if I get you to relax and have you do that exercise, without telling me, you're going to, boom, go to that place. And it's the addressing, right? Acknowledging. So it's even like in 12 steps, you acknowledge the problem. So acknowledging the block, just having that, imagining that ray going to that block, boom, it no longer is there. There's a Jungian exercise where if you see someone chasing you in a nightmare, if you can train yourself subconsciously in your dream to turn around and face that demon or monster, they will turn into an ally. And so it's the same concept, right, in 12 steps or recovery. If you address that thing that you are battling with, it then becomes a messenger or an ally. It has a message for you of transformation.
Okay, back to the white rolling pin. Okay, sorry. Am I feeling a change somatically in my body, or am I getting an image, or is there a snap? Is there a sound? How do the clients experience the fact that I'm in contact with the block and it's being removed? Some examples.
I ask them to tell me when the process is complete for them. So I'm releasing that control to just say, when that feels complete, just say okay, so that I know that I can move on to the next step of that exercise. Some people report feeling an actual movement of something moving, or some people report feeling hot, like energy, heat moving. Those are kind of the most common that have been.
But is there a cognitive moment? I mean, something I've never thought about suddenly pops up while I'm doing this?
A part of it is to have no judgment. So without judging yourself or whatever comes up, to be open simply to the process of that experience of whatever is happening in the moment. So without any judgment, without any preconception, to just witness whatever comes up. It's not for me to keep track of, right? A lot of it happens very fast. I mean, we're doing this in an hour and a half, maybe 2 hours max.
And do I report to you, okay, this is what I felt?
Usually at the end, I'll ask for some feedback. But while we're doing it, it's like you're doing, you're in surgery, kind of, so to speak. You're not like, it's the details don't, those details are superfluous to the process.
Okay. All right, I needed to know, right? Didn't we? We needed to know how.
I asked them if they're ready to move on. Like, okay, can we go to the next step? Like, are you ready to move on? Is this a little too much? Like, if somebody's really like reliving kind of something, I don't re-traumatize anyone. So if I see that they're de-escalating because they're getting triggered, I have to maintain that space, and I have to maintain their body and keep them in alignment so that they're not having a full like psychotic break in front of me. And that's the clinical training right there. A lot of people, I was a yoga instructor and now I want to do this like overnight. Well, it's not that simple. Sometimes you're dealing with some very, very broken people who have split personalities. That's another thing. During trauma, sometimes a piece of that person can split off. Again, that sounds very, very esoteric. So I do something called like calling back the soul, or retrieving the soul. It's called soul retrieval, actually. So it's calling back that part of the person, and people feel it. They feel like, oh, like I'm more present, I'm more whole.
Thank you. You wrote in your in the website, since 2006, in my hypnosis practice, I have had only 4 clients out of over 1,000 who did not succeed to their fullest potential. That is because they came in with a horrendous attitude. I tell people that they have to want to see positive results in their lives. I'm not a babysitter. I do not sugarcoat things for people, but I am also respectful. So can you speak a little bit as to the clients that you weren't able to have them self-fulfilled?
I think over the years, as you grow with experience in any work, you become aware of the ideal client. The ideal client is somebody who really wants to embrace their own process and their own work. The worst type of client for me is someone who wants to come in and make me responsible for their healing or make me responsible for their life. And I've become a little bit more honed in. And sometimes there's personality disorders where people have a certain predilection to blame others for their issues, whether it's a defense mechanism or whatever. But it's that, can you heal me of this? Can you cure me of smoking cigarettes? Can you do this for me? I don't promise anything, but I say what I can do is I can help guide you in the direction that you need to go to do that for yourself. I'm the facilitator. You're the one who's actually doing the work. So the horrendous attitude is, what are you going to do for me? Or you didn't do enough for me. That's the horrendous attitude, because the client who gets the most out of it is the person who says, I'm tired of this. I want change. I want to get better. I'm open. I'll try anything at this point. I want something better than what I'm experiencing now. And PTSD is no joke. When someone is going through post-traumatic stress disorder, it's torturous to re-experience that kind of trauma.
And you said also that the metaphor for my understanding of my therapeutic relationship to my clients are the healer as a martial artist, bending with the flow of movement and cutting through to reach a source of clarity with which to light the way for the journeying, wounded client. So this is how you see yourself in the process. Once I'm saying, I'm open, I need change, I'm here, ready.
There's a book that was part of my graduate training called The Healer as a Martial Artist. And in martial arts, you don't resist the force coming to you. You move out of the way. And so everything I do with each client is customized to that client in the moment. So I have to move with the flow. If a client is coming up against something, then I have to flow with what they're coming up against. I can't I can't block it or resist it. Even in removing a block, it's about, let's penetrate this thing and transform it in a way that is not further damaging. And that is the skill level, right? That takes obviously years of training, direct training and know-how. Part of why I wanted to do this was to share a wider understanding of the work that I'm doing, which I think bridges what are ancient traditions that are lost with current, I would say, trends in cutting edge healing, especially in Los Angeles and California. But to be able to help others who are practitioners to access this kind of work, and there's many roads to Mecca. There's many forms of healing. Even massage therapy can be very healing. So again, it's moving with the person and gauging those nuances throughout the session, right? Like you're a yoga instructor, so it's that vinyasa flow. You have to be able to move through the stretch, the discomfort. Mm-hmm. And that I equate like a river or being a martial artist. It's navigating that, those subtle changes as you're going through the session.
So let's talking about the 4 clients who had the horrendous attitudes and your ability to use or channel energy. Talk about some of the successes that you've had. If you can give some individual cases, you've worked with stress, you've worked with anxiety, trauma, sexual trauma, veterans, PTSD trauma, which is also sexual, of course. Talk about some of the maybe 3 or 4 cases, or one in each category, if you could.
So just to address that, because it sounds kind of, it sounds bad, horrendous attitude. But, someone may not be ready for that healing. So their attitude, that horrendous attitude may be, the yeah buts, like every suggestion, yeah but, it's like throwing up roadblocks. Well, that person's not really ready to go into that type of healing. So the people who are really ready, who see the results, I have a video up of it was a Vietnam vet who came to me. He had shrapnel in his back in Vietnam. He went when he was 19 years old, apple pie. 19-year-old, had never been in combat, went to boot camp. They threw him off he was a gunner, actually. They threw him on a helicopter, and put him on a gun, and said, start shooting. And he said when we saw the first person fall, he just gasped, and then he numbed out, and it became automatic, and he said he didn't know how many he killed. Well, ironically, his son was killed by a sniper in LA, and he had come back, after Vietnam. They gave him his papers. The armed services and the VA are two separate entities. So he had to stand in line at the VA and had still to this, this was a couple of years ago, but he had not been served at the VA. So he was battling to get himself served. He was in a tremendous amount of pain, and his son had been killed by a sniper, which he felt, I don't think he believed in karma, like that wasn't his tradition, but he had that feeling like this was the retribution for what he had done. And so one of the exercises I did with him was to have him address everybody he'd killed and ask for forgiveness while in hypnosis. So he saw them all, like a big crowd of them. It was that ability to ask for forgiveness that released his soul from the suffering. And he was transformed because of just that. I did other exercises, the movement of energy exercises and releasing the trauma from his body. But just that one particular exercise, it was like a weight had been lifted from him. He'd been carrying that guilt for all those years. So that was a Vietnam vet PTSD that was in one session. And I followed up with him. He was able then to get out of bed and fight for his house during the housing crisis. So that was quite astounding. So there's been a lot of trauma. The school I went to encouraged me to put my shingle out and say smoking cessation, because those were the big key words on the internet at the time. But smoking is the thing that brings you in, right? So if the person's like chain smoking, what are they chain smoking for? What is underneath that? Is it anxiety, and why are they anxious? So the thing that brings a person in is never the thing itself. It is just the messenger of that thing. So an example, 35-year-old young mother with anxiety, social anxiety, overthinking every single thing that she says in social circles, had a very tumultuous childhood. So there wasn't enough of that positive voice, the parental voice that was positive that she had in her mind, that she could reflect positively back to herself. So it's actually reparenting and retraining that subconscious voice to be able to pull as a tool and have that subconscious voice within yourself to be able to have a dialogue in that split second in a public setting where you can become your own advocate. So there's not so much anxiety like, why am I freaking out about this, right? This is not such a big deal. It's the whole like, does my butt look big in these pants? Well, unless your butt is like the size of this room, nobody cares, right? It's all in your head. So it's that inner dialogue, getting that adjustment.
Sexual trauma?
Huge. It's since the beginning of time. The statistics are out the roof. It's 50% of all females before the age of 12. One out of 4 to 1 out of 6 boys before the age of 16. And it's never about sex. It's about power and control. It's always about power and control. So it's about someone who feels disempowered dominating someone who's more vulnerable than them. And unfortunately, sex is one of the main drives, the human drive. So whether it's sex or eating, you can't really, unless you're going to force feed someone to eat, but it is one of the main human drives, and so it's used as a dominant force experience. And so it's again restructuring that experience, releasing the somatic memory. The body holds memory, so releasing that somatic memory and empowering, having the victim give back that individual's power to them. Not power, I'm sorry, that their energy, because the victim has to take back their power, so they have to give back that energy that they've been carrying for that other person, that the other person put onto them. So the abuser always puts that energy onto the person without their consent, and it's about saying, I don't want this anymore, I'm not carrying this for you. And that's so hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of clients with sexual trauma particularly.
And one exercise you would use? in a sexual trauma case, for instance.
Well, that in particular, giving back the energy of the abuser to the abuser, whether they're dead or alive, in hypnosis. So having that face-to-face confrontation and having the person say, I know I am no longer carrying this for you, is changing the dynamic from victim to empowered individual.
And seeing successes with that method.
Instantly.
Instantly means what?
They come out and their faces change. I've seen people gain 10 years. Just
gain or lose?
Or lose, I should say, like gain 10 years, like they're 10 years younger.
Okay.
You know what I mean? So, or lose 10 years of stress. But yeah, they look younger because they're not, their face isn't contorted, like their facial muscles are relaxed. There's
relationship improvements.
Communication improvements. Yeah, it varies per person, but yeah, those are some of the big kind of umbrella issues, definitely. But I think it's again starting with the self, like you said. So it's that the minute that they're able to be more at peace with themselves. So recently, a young woman was date raped in college by someone she knew, which is very common. And she was going crazy recently. And she came to me and we did it. And that is, right? So traditional shamans become a conduit for some kind of external force that comes through them. I'm not interested in that. I'm not interested in lending my body to anybody. But it is that space that's created where they can address that person like a hologram and shift the energy that happened so long ago and release it where it is no longer their story. That is transformational. So that individual came to me one time and I followed up with her and she left completely transformed. It had just gone from her. That whatever it was that she was carrying where she was losing her mind, literally, she hadn't dealt with it in 15 years.
Wow. Excellent. Well, let's draw to a close, but you said you wanted to just do a group exercise with us, and shall we try that, and then we'll do a few questions and answers and
Sure.
wrap it up.
One of the things that I learned, again, in one of my kind of out there trainings, in terms of the power of the mind, is that the only way to access the power of your mind is through imagination. So imagination is really important, especially with children, because imagining, like when children go through that fairy tale age of imagining that they're Wonder Woman or Superman, it is empowering them through imagination. So I'm going to do an exercise. It's called a grounding exercise. So this is so prevalent today that we have such a busy world, driving and running around, that it's easy to not feel grounded. So this is a very simple one, okay? So I'm going to ask you to put your hands on your knees and your feet square. And just when you're ready, close your eyes. And we're just going to take 4 deep breaths. And again, without any judgment, just notice yourself breathing in all the way down to your feet, grabbing any stress, tension, or anxiety from your feet and blowing it out with that yoga breath, releasing everything through your exhale. Okay. And again, deep breath. We're just going to do that 4 times. All the way down to your feet and exhale, releasing. And again, all the way down to your feet and exhale. And one more time. All the way down to your feet, sending your breath to your toes and releasing. And now, pretend or imagine a ball in your head, like a bowling ball, and you're going to just drop it straight down to your tailbone and down to the core of the earth. You're going to drop it straight down through your tailbone into the core of the earth and drop all of that stress, tension, and anxiety straight down into the core of the earth to be recycled and regenerated by the hot molten lava of the earth. Just leave it, give it to the earth. And now pull in clean energy from above your head down to your fingertips and toes, recharging your whole body with just clean, vibrant energy down to your fingertips and toes. And when you're ready, you can open your eyes.
Let's take a couple of minutes if anyone has any questions or comments we'd love to address to. Laura, please.
Can you tell us some more about Naropa?
What would you like to know?
No, I don't know what to know. I don't know. I just, can you tell us more about what they do?
They have multiple programs there. Right. They're always expanding. The original programs were Buddhist teaching Buddhist psychology and writing and poetics, the disembodied School of Disembodied Writers and Poets. And so it was sort of a transformational, artistic, creative place, but also of the mind. And then it evolved from there, and then they also have somatic psychology and then the psychology department, which I was in. It is a very fertile place for personal transformation and learning. Like I said, it was like a Jedi school. I mean, you're not like learning how to move energy, but with your hands, so to speak. But although they may have that going on now, but it's more about getting in touch with your process, whether you're a writer or an artist or a dancer or a therapist. What is your experience in that moment? So that mindfulness awareness experience of how am I existing in this moment? And then how does that translate as I move through the world?
Very cool. Nice.
I hope that answered your question.
I think so.
Okay, good.
Yeah.
Yes.
You mentioned that veteran, you asked him to do asking for forgiveness for the people he should. Did he really see those people he should, actual souls, or he just imagined?
I can't tell you that. And, I can't tell you, but what's important is that he got the experience for himself of that communication, whereas I don't think he would have consciously known how to even access that on his own. So I was able to facilitate that experience for him, which I saw that his pain so much needed, and that's the thing we don't understand about soldiers. I mean, I say myself that the anti-war movement has to come from the soldiers because they're worker ants. They're being sent out there. He was innocent. He was drafted and he was put in this position. He was a good person, but that was his job, was to be a gunner and to kill these people. It was a conflict with everything he'd been taught as a Christian in America, that's the worst thing you can do. He was so conflicted that in order to bring peace, it was let's address this conflict and ask. What is the asking is for forgiveness. And so in his ability to do that, whether he saw the faces or not, I actually brought up the crowd. I said, you're going to see this crowd of people and you're going to address them. And he was able to do that. And in that moment, his soul was free of that burden. And that was the transformation. Does that answer your question? Mm-hmm. Okay. Mm-hmm. Yes.
Do you do past life regression? And if so, what are the benefits?
Absolutely. Great question. It's one of the stranger things that I've been trained to do. It was part of my training. Again, kind of went in open, like, okay, it's part of the coursework. I'm going to do this. I can't tell you, even though my mother's family is partially Buddhist, and I identified with that in the school at Naropa, it is not my 100% identity. It's part of my identity. So I can't tell you 100% that it's valid. I can't tell you it's not valid, but I can tell you that people who have come to me that I have facilitated could not have rehearsed the stories that come out of them. And they flow out of people. And the conclusion that they leave with that comes out of that story is more important than any preconception I have of whether it's true or not. So for example, I had a woman in a relationship now where he constantly leaves. She doesn't know why. She just leaves for a period of time. And they live together. He will just leave. And she said, where did you go? And he said, well, I went off for a while and now I'm back. And she said it was getting to a point where it wasn't working for her. And she wanted to know this. She said it felt deeper than just what was happening today. So I did the past life regression. Fascinating. She saw herself at the turn of the century in Russia. She was a peasant. He was a peasant. They fell in love. They married. There was no work. They lived in a dacha, right, in the country. So he went off. They might have had steam trains at that time. He wandered off with his rucksack, and she waved to him, and she described it. I can see it from her description. She says green fields, farmland, the dachas, but they were rural. They were peasants. Everyone wants to be Cleopatra, but everybody was a peasant, if we look at history. And she waited and waited and waited and waited. And his journey took him further and further and further away. But she saw that she waited and waited and waited way into old age for him to return. I don't remember if he returned or not. But what she got from that was that there was a reliving of that lesson. Now, in Buddhist psychology, they say, whether it's karma or whatever, the lesson is to come to some conclusion. So in life, if you have a karmic lesson with somebody, you're reliving that to come to a conclusion. So either to seal up the contract, or to create a new contract in this life, or to change the contract. So for her, it was the choice, do you want to repeat this again? Or do you want to change this? And she left with that and felt that she had a deeper understanding of why he was leaving. That it was like an old experience that he was reliving. Part of neurolinguistic programming, so Milton Erickson, who was a member of the American Psychiatric Association and a hypnotherapist, I think it was like the 50s, roughly, if I'm remembering, he was very interesting. He suffered from polio, and so the training at Naropa, the transpersonal part, is the crisis is the opportunity or the roadmap for growth. So Milton Erickson developed neurolinguistic programming, which is using your words consciously. So for example, I don't want any more war. The words that stick out, want more war. So rather, I want more peace. Right? You see how that's different? So now, I grew up in New York, and I have Jewish aunts by marriage, so we call it kvetching, right? So kvetching is great. It's fun sometimes to kvetch, to let go of steam, to complain. In Western psychoanalysis, the basis is that you basically kvetch and blow off steam, and you process through that. However, 20 years of processing the same issue and kvetching about the same issue is reinforcing that issue over like a hammer on a nail, driving it in deeper and deeper and deeper. I don't do that. Now, I came into healing as a facilitator practitioner during managed care, where healthcare was changing dramatically in the 90s, where you used to be able to go to the doctor, you paid your insurance, you could go whenever you want. Then they said, oh, you got 5 sessions. So the head of my department said, if you have 1 session with someone, how are you going to transform their lives? And that grabbed me. Like, it grabbed me, by the gizzards. And I thought, how am I going to do that? And so I wrote my thesis on self-esteem. And self-esteem is the core. So transforming through raising self-esteem is the cornerstone of my work, no matter what the issue.
One question here, then we'll take one more question. But I remember you told me the story. You work with children over the age of 10, you told me, on hypnosis, with hypnotherapy. You mentioned the young man who came in and you regressed him to past lives. He saw himself as animals. Can you talk about that case?
Yeah, there have been numerous people who I have done past lives with that have remembered themselves as animals, and it's something that's very mysterious to me, because in the Buddhist, there's Tibetan Buddhism and there's Chinese Buddhism, and it all comes out, like Buddhism is very connected to animism, which is nature worship. And so in a lot of the stories I heard from my grandmother, who was from Malaysia, who was Chinese, but their lineage was Taoist and earth worshippers, was a lot of like the monkey god and the animal, the pig god. So they had animal gods, and so they do in India also. In many cultures, they have, and American Indians, of course, they have all these animal spirits and gods. There's an understanding that animals will choose to come in, or souls will choose to come in as animals for progressive learning, and that And it's sort of, how should I say, it's like very narcissistic for humans to think that we're the ultimate it. I think that there's like a consciousness out there in the universe that's like greater than us. There's got to be like extraterrestrials or something. However, that the experience of becoming human is the elevation or the evolution to a much higher consciousness. So it's going through these gradations and getting to that level. There's some teachings that, there's this whole movement towards veganism, which I don't knock. I mean, whatever anyone's choice is, but that souls choose to donate their time to go, to come in as a cattle or pig or whatever to provide food. And that even though they may suffer, it's short and they're next, they're on. So one experience was I was working with school children. And as a little girl, my job was to transform behaviors in schools, because if children fail in 5th grade, the correlation between failure in 5th grade and prison time as an adult is direct. It's a direct line. So it's huge to save those kids. And so this girl couldn't sit still. And I said, do you know why you can't sit still? And she said, yeah, because I was a cheetah. And I said, you were a cheetah? She said, yeah, it's really hard for me to sit still because I notice everything around me and I can't not notice it because I was a cheetah and I was very fast and you're asking me to sit still. This is a kid in the no hypnosis. This is straight art therapy and talking. Why 10 years old? Because the brain development shifts at 10 to become more conscious of cause and effect. Before that, children don't track linearly, so it's kind of like here, there, and everywhere. So you don't want to suggest ideas to them that they're not conscious of. Like, oh yeah, I did that. Then it's ridiculous. It's like, what's really happening here? I'm the one who's creating these stories for them. So I called her dad. She actually had 2 dads, modern family. And I said, this is her experience. Do not tell her she's wrong, because that's not going to help. Just accept the story and try to help her to understand the world she's in now. Try to help her understand these expectations and work with it in chunks. So the accommodation, right, in the Western world, it's the individual education plan is the accommodation in the schools. So the accommodation, my job is to talk to the teacher and say, listen, this child has a very hard time sitting still, so the accommodation is if she needs to get up and reorient, either go to the bathroom, take a break, go in the corner where you have your book corner, read a book for a minute. She's still hearing the lesson, but she's redirecting her energy, that frenetic energy, so that she can still be in the classroom. So that's a classroom accommodation that is becoming more popular in classrooms. So that's some of the work that I did, but it's not unique to me.
Now, a psychotherapist might say, well, that's ADHD.
That's exactly that we have classified that as, and there's been generations of kids who've been medicated. Now, medication can help. I'm not going to knock it. In some cases, it's extreme with people who are incredibly psychotic, and African tribes believe that people who are psychotic are channeling constantly, and they may be channeling demons. What is a demon? Whether it's an energy in themselves that's unfinished or erratic, or it's energy out in the world floating around that has built up, for example, like in bars, low life energy. So there are frequencies of energy. That's a whole other discussion, right? So, but people can pick up frequencies of energy, and that's the danger of substance abuse, is that nobody's guarding the gate of the soul. So when someone is wasted, right? And I mean, I was in college. So when someone is wasted, they're not completely aware or be able to guard the gate of the soul. However, some people are much stronger than others. But I've done lots of work, and in my training, I've had to be cleared. So I've been cleared of stuff myself, where, a practitioner who's a much higher master level than myself had said, yeah, there's something here that, you've been carrying since you were at this one location, and I'm going to clear it off. And then I kind of feel like, oh yeah, God, that's gone from my shoulder, like that, like it felt like it's like I had a knife in my shoulder, like that actually. I know somebody who's like, he's incredible, this body worker. And I said, I feel like there's a knife in my shoulder. And he said, yeah, someone threw something at you. Yeah, that's a whole other discussion, right? Psychic attack. The power of the mind. How do we use the power of our mind? And so, those of us who are benevolent become more aware of the power of our thoughts and how we're using that with people. But when there's such hatred directed, and hatred can be cultivated, through deception or betrayal. how do we become aware of what's going on there so that we don't leak our energy, because it becomes an energy leak. Your energy should be used for more productive things.
Wow. Well, thank you very much, Aura. This was very
Thank
enlightening.
you.
Very important. Thank you so much. And thank you for coming. And to our audience members, we hope we'll see you online as well. Thank you.
Thank you, Etan, and thank you, our lovely hostess, Vanya, for having us. Beautiful house. Thank you so much. Thank you. So wonderful. Thank you to our cameraman, too. Thank you to everyone who's...
He never gets anything.